you went home as well.
Are you both at Web3 Summit?
Yeah. Well, what really doesn't count, it's no effort to show up at Web3.
I mean, it's a 10-minute bike ride.
Okay, some effort. I'll take that. I think we have more folks, right? JV, I think, is going to join.
I'm not sure JV is. I saw his name
Yeah, we have
scribbled
JV.
out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know whether that's a sign.
We
I
have
think this might be
Axel. Well, no, we have Axel
Axel.
as well.
Yeah, Axel is due.
Rob, how is it? How is the stability of this thing? Yes, not very stable. Let me ask JB. Let's give it another couple of minutes. Let me check what is his.
B.
And there he is.
We
Hey,
have
JB.
Jonathan.
Hey guys.
And an Axel. Okay, I think we're all collected. Maybe
More or less.
you
More or
okay?
less. Yeah, Rab said to start without him, so.
Sorry, who was saying to start without him?
Rab is trying to join, but his Zoom is not cooperating, so he's like, start without me.
Oh, okay. Well, I will raise the curtain.
My Zoom also decided now it needed an update.
Cool. So for those of you watching the live stream or the recording afterwards, welcome to the second of these fireside chats about Filecoin Plus. A couple of months ago, we had a discussion for about a couple of hours, which is what we expect this to take, about Filecoin and the Phil Plus incentives program for verified data on the Filecoin network. And now we're having a second chat. We've pulled in a couple of new guests, get some wider perspective on those topics, and to think about more about aligning Filecoin's incentive structure better with the long-term goals of the ecosystem as a whole. So let me just do a quick round robin of who people are. I first start to introduce Will Scott. Will, wave your hand. There you go. Is currently CTO of Filecoin Incentive Design Labs, FIDDLE, which tries to incentivize good behavior on Filecoin. Right now, it's heavily focused on improving Phil Plus. Peter Robertson, perhaps better known as Reba Sushi, there he is, was a Protocol Labs engineer for several years, working on the large-scale storage onboarding initiatives. He's a lot of, I think he's one of the key people for bringing all of this together. JV, Jonathan Victor, who can't wave because he's just a giant J. Maybe you can just wave your tail of the J. JV is founder of Answer Research and Filecoin TLDR, which interfaces with Filecoin ecosystem partners, token holders, and the wider community. If you've read any deep dive on Filecoin or been to the Filecoin Discord, you'll know JV's work. I'm a senior fellow at the Filecoin Foundation, used to be director of strategy at the EFF, and our new guests include Axel Cortes-Cabrera, who is research scientist at Crypto Econ Lab. He's interested in complex systems and crypto economic networks. He recently gave a talk at the Filecoin Dev Summit in Brussels on Filecoin value accrual. And Rob Quist, who just joined us, is from Dukesoft. Has been in a storage provider on the Filecoin network for many years in the EU, and also participates in other blockchain chain networks. Okay, I talked a lot there, and didn't let anybody else get a word in edgeways, but I'm just going to quickly say we talked a little bit about the challenges with Filecoin Plus and building incentive models in general last time. There was a lot of us, so maybe we can start off by hearing a little bit about what Rob and Axel have been thinking in this area. Rob, we have is your sound working? Let's just test that, shall we? I saw you briefly. It was very exciting. All right. Well, if Rob's still working to get his sound working, maybe we can switch over to Axel. So Axel, you work at the Crypto Econ Lab. What's your take on the role of Filecoin Plus in the wider ecosystem?
That's a heavy question to start.
Okay, I can start with a lighter one. How are you doing?
Great.
Good.
Great.
Good.
I think I'm a moderate in terms of Field Plus, in terms of like I completely understand the discomfort people have with Field Plus, but also understand the reasons why it's there, right? Let's start with the reasons why. I think more accurately, I think the reasons why something like it's there. Perhaps it doesn't need to be what it is, but it's that right. So without it, like I said, the argument is that what we have is sort of a network that is just incentivizing something useless, or like just incentivizing all this empty capacity to go in there, and then you have like just some weird version of proof of work kind of thing, and you ideally want some program that turns that into right. So it goes to the mission of Filecoin, which you have all this storing humanity's important information and all of this, right? And it's kind of an imperfect attempt to trying to fulfill that mission, right? And I think the main problem is that that's a really difficult mission. Right? It's very difficult to do that, right? Yeah, it's definitely imperfect, and I see like there's many ways to attack it. Okay, so yeah, this yeah, I think most important, like just you have to talk about valuable data, right? And as soon as you do that, that's problematic. We want to distinguish valuable data from empty sectors, and then it's hard to think of a way to do that that isn't going to be problematic in some way. But
so what are the kind of analytic approaches
something like Field Plus
yeah. What are the kind of analytic approaches that something like the Crypto Econ Lab takes on this?
Right. So I mean, one question to start, like, at whatever it is actually doing, is it actually working? The question is yes. So you can disagree in a sense, like what it's doing, you don't like it, but it's working in a sense. Yeah, it's incentivizing people to do these things that it set out to do, right? So are so the question is like, are these incentives appropriate to modify the behavior to these things that we're telling people to do? And yes, like a lot more, right? So you can see graphs of the growth of data cap and Field Plus, and particularly like percentage of Field Plus sectors in terms of like how much of network power is Field Plus, right, and things like this. Yeah, so it's definitely incentivizing people to do these things, right? But there's also like there have been questions like questions get like the analytics of it get a bit more. You have to stretch more things when things like there's generally not great economic conditions. Okay, so like in a sense, like I guess what I'm trying to say is if like fuel price goes very high, like a lot of things will work, right? So people don't need to do this data cap because they're compensated enough, and so a lot of our problems go away, right? If just yeah, we have all this to play with, right? But then yeah, so when it's low, you right, so when the conditions are not super great, you run into situations like is Fuel Plus actually necessary for like anyone to break even? So like, is this the only way for anyone to break even? And we have looked at before, and yeah, so I don't know. I think yeah, there's many possible questions to ask, and yeah, let's ask them and talk about them. I think JV has a hand for a while.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I could just highlight, I think what's an implicit assumption. So I think it's like good to say like, hey, we have a North Star as a network. The goal is to be like the foundation for humanity's information. And I think like that's fine as a mission statement. I don't think we should confuse ourselves though on like what is the best implementation of getting there. Because I think like a relevant question, which I think the Phil Plus thing actually hinges on is like, what is the best pathway of us achieving that outcome? I know one theory people have is that if we're able to do this sort of like explicit tying of like useful data to sort of like block rewards, then you're able to basically use the incentives where if Phil price shoots off to like 30, there's a massive incentive vector for like new data to come onto the network and like real users to come. I think that's like a specific view on how the network could evolve. I think there's another view, which is like that really then puts us in this like gradient field where like Phil price, in order for that like lever to work, you need Phil price to go up. In the absence of that, you fall into like this thing of is it cheaper or easier for people to get paid deals versus to try to like figure out how to game Phil plus. And I think that's like a more interesting question if like yeah, I mean, maybe to put it more simply, I think there is an implicit assumption that we should discuss at some point on this call, which is like, what is the best way of delivering on that vision? Is the best way to basically get people to focus on paid deals? And what is the best mechanism to get people to focus on like the hard work of building out the tools, finding the customers to do paid deals? Or is it to like lean into Phil Plus? And is Phil Plus actually accelerating us on that? So it's more like the frame. So I think all of the policy decisions that we think about and discuss should be in the frame of like, are we accelerating like adoption, or are we like falling into a bunch of debates about how we improve specific branches that we may or may not need to be on?
Yeah, and follow up on this a little bit. While kind of the way the conversation was set up, at the beginning of this call is coming from almost a research perspective. We have a live network to contend with, right? Which is doing things based on its own optimization function, if you will. So we had the first call in this series almost 2 months ago, if I remember correctly, maybe a little less than that, 7 weeks. The numbers from that time were 6.2 exabytes of raw actual data, stored on the network, like actual drives. And 22.6 was the QAP with the dilution of Fuel Plus and stuff like that. And today QAP has not moved at all, maybe by 100 pips, but we lost an entire exabyte. So now we are at 5.2 as I look at the chain right now. So there are ideals that we get the network to strive to, and the realities of what is happening to to storage providers and other participants in this network, which I feel like we need to somehow discuss a little more from a pragmatic standpoint, as opposed to kind of like the way you put it, we have parameters to play with here and there. And I don't really know how to pivot the conversation towards what is it that we're trying to achieve, because we kind of, again, started from Feel Plus as the point of discussion, which from my perspective is either a tool or a symptom, but it is not an outcome by itself, because again, like it's not what we're trying to do. At least that's how I understand what Filecoin is. Any comments on that?
I can say some controversial things to continue the conversation, perhaps. I think there's maybe a couple things that are worth throwing into the mix, and I guess they relate as much to JB's previous points as anything. I think when we talk about Phil Plus, it's worth disambiguating between the, I don't know if I want to say principles, but the concept that there is a tax or an inflation in the network that is going to try to somehow be used to grow the network. And so is there an incentivization program? And if so, what is the, what are successful ways to have that structured? And then there's the specific mechanism of what's structured now of Phil Plus. And so when we're saying, well, maybe we don't want as much tax when we don't have this dynamo engine of price leading to increased onboarding, I think one of the places where we often sort of end up in contention is some people are talking about the specific mechanism that exists now, where others are sort of trying to think about, well, in any, like, if we say we're giving up this more broad concept, or what is the plan to, continue to have this thing that seems like a longer term critical thing, where what you'll find, at least, my concept of what I would be resistant to is saying we're going to give up any possibility of incentives, or we're not going to do this, because I think there are these sort of broad strokes of, in the future, without an incentivization layer or without inflation, it's going to be very hard for the network to end up directing itself in ways that compete with any other centralized or decentralized storage network. So I think there is some sense of tax, and I think if we just give that up because we say in the short term we need to focus on paid deals, it's going to be very hard to have the conversation of let's bring in a tax. I think that's a thing where, especially when you've got a governance of the existing participants, there's going to be a lot of resistance. And so I think thinking about how we do this in terms of a shifting to a different form of tax that we're more okay with, where we still have a way that accomplishes these long-term goals, is more palatable than saying, well, we want to give it up now in a short term. Because I think the worry is that trying to talk about bringing it back in the future is a harder conversation. And so there's, I think that's probably maybe enough to speak that piece.
Yeah, actually, I have a very quick question for you. You kind of glanced over the tax as a concept. Can you restate what you think the tax specifically is for, to kind of formalize it more?
Sure. So I think I've heard this stated a few ways. There's always going to be a cheapest way to participate in the network, to invest in the network, to stake in the network, etc. And if that is the game, you want to look at what is the reason why someone is doing something more expensive or not on that optimal curve. And for instance, acquiring new customers is going to be more expensive and higher risk than not doing that. And so if you look at where sort of the safe dollars are going, why would you go to the thing that has higher risk when you can get a known reward at cheaper price, or certainly a known price, by just buying some hard drives and putting them there? And so somehow you want to say that people who are doing these things that are somewhat risky, but that we think are good for long-term growth of the network, should be rewarded somehow because they're improving the overall network through things like name recognition increase, additional clients knowing about it, and onboarding stuff. There's a whole lot of ways that the network gets larger and better, and some of that leads to proportional rewards because there becomes more demand for Filecoin, and so everyone who's invested in Filecoin wins from that economic thing. But there's no particular individual benefit for me going out and getting those new customers and growing the network. And so you end up with this sort of tragedy of the commons where lots of people might take the cheap way and hope someone else is growing the network. But there's nothing to direct the next step of those more expensive things that are long-term beneficial. And so I think that's the like thought of like what is the path by which we hope to be able to make that taking the risk, doing the thing that helps grow the network pay off, both for the individual and for the overall network. So the network is helping align those incentives to do these things like customer acquisition, BD, all of these things that require additional operational overhead and risk. Serving user data, lots of unknown risks, very expensive relative to a very safe and unrisky operations of just buying hard drives. So there's a set of things where it's like, okay, if we're capturing this longer term, larger storage market that we believe has a lot of value compared to being a proof of network, we need to have some way to incentivize people to move towards that. I don't know. Was that a rough explanation of and so I think what I maybe didn't connect that fully to is like, why does that mean inflation? And I think that link is, well, we need some pool, and so where is that pool coming from if not inflation? Right. So you can say one way to do this is we're going to sort of generate some additional block rewards or something that causes an inflation of fill in some sense, or we're going to change the existing inflation curve by allocating some of it in a way that we give ourselves this ability to manipulate block rewards to incentivize it. But you're either going to be making more fill, which leads to inflation, or you're going to be taking fill from somewhere else, which you can and Axel, you probably know more about this than I do, so I'm not sure I should be the one sort of talking about the specific inflation thing, but somehow you're saying we have an incentive, and that involves some amount of the currency that's coming from somewhere. And so you're either inflating the overall pot and making everyone pay a little bit, or you're finding some other mechanism to say, well, who is the loser here that is getting reallocated? And they're suffering inflation.
I just want to check to see if Rob, is your audio working yet? Maybe not. Don't worry, Rob.
I thought I heard something briefly.
Yeah, I heard a little squirt. But Rob, just feel free to jump in whenever you think you can. JV, you still have your hand up, so I'm gonna bounce it to you.
I just wanted to add or maybe respond to Lola. I think one thing to remember is pay deals. So I think there's a different branch of this conversation we could also be having, which is at an end state, what do we believe is sustainable for the network? Because I do think it's important to note, yes, doing things just with your own hard drives is definitely safer. I think the other side of that is if you take pay deals, you do have an external cash source that's enabling you to run your operation. So I think there was an interesting question there of what do we see as steady state? Do we see it being reasonable that pay deals will sustain the network? Is the belief that in order for Filecoin to be competitive, we need block rewards as a subsidy to make it work? Because I think it's important to just highlight okay, yes, there's tooling that needs to be built. We're sort of in this gappy period where there's a lot of stuff that has to exist. But I do think if the long-term steady state is everyone needs to get paid deals, and the plan is that hardware is fun. And I would argue, actually, regardless of Phil Plus or not Phil Plus, if everyone is doing Phil Plus, we actually end up in the same spot because the block rewards proportionally will also get split up. So like paid deals have to be the end state, regardless of Phil Plus or not Phil Plus. So I think that's like one important point. I think the other point about like how we want to do the distribution, like I will say something that I know will rankle some people on this call. You could also imagine, instead of using data cap, like if one of the issues people have is permissionlessness, like what if we instead had token holders just like directly stake in like a delegated form with people on the network? And like there's other mechanisms to achieve sort of this outcome and force like public accountability and other things. So I think there's another question of like, should this be a protocol sort of like quote unquote governed social thing, or should it be like, cool, there's a direct protocol mechanic for how token holders can stake and delegate to people who maybe can redirect rewards? I think there's other networks that seem to be pulling versions of this off. And so I think there's also
Could you expand on that a little bit, JV? Like what are you thinking there?
Well, okay, so Filecoin has always been this kind of like in-between thing of proof of work and proof of stake, and arguably it's not really doing either perfectly well. It's like kind of shot the middle between the two. And so you could also imagine a world where you just say, look, Filecoin leans much more into proof of stake. People can stake with various providers. In order for Fiddle to continue getting my personal stake, they will convince me that they are actually a net good for the network. Actually, an interesting example of this is Solana, where it sets up the incentive field for Mert to be on Twitter constantly defending Helios and the Solana network because his business is tied to Solana's growth. And so you could actually imagine other systems if we were to like take a step back and just say, okay, what are the core properties that we need? Is it that the network is permissionless? Is it that the network needs to direct an incentive field and that needs to be able to move over time, et cetera? I guess the point I'm making is like there's other dimensions we could be discussing. And so it may be worth talking about like what is the full slate of options versus like here is a specific pathway. And I'm not actually saying that we necessarily need to move off of this specific pathway, but I do think it's important to say like, so what are the properties that matter and what are like better versions? Like to me, the biggest issue is actually like how much intellectual capital do we push into like having this debate back and forth, knowing like where people stand in the community, and it's like pretty fractured. Like what is the thing that actually moves us forward fastest? So yeah.
So Axel, go for it.
Yeah, just forgot what specific point I was replying to, but I think it's worth also like we should probably like define what is Phil Plus now and what is good and what is so. When I say like I'm careful saying something like Phil Plus, I say like I understand why we need something like Phil Plus, and what I mean by that is like if so we have the Filecoin. So what I guide myself is like this is Filecoin mission statement or whatever that is a network for storing humanity's information and so on. Then we need some mechanism that tries to do something like that. Right. So if you take from that, you need something. Now, what we have right now is one particular way of trying to do that. It has many parameters that are the way they are and are maybe movable or changed for something else completely different, right? So we decided to implement this as a multiplier, right? So it means that, and then you have this weird dynamics, as you were saying, if everyone is doing Phil Plus, and then it's the same as if no one is doing that. So what we're doing is we're keeping the total amount of block reward fixed, but we're giving you a multiplier, which means that if you do Phil Plus, you're taking a bit from all the others that are not doing Phil Plus, right? That's one way to set it up. And we set these multipliers to be 10x. 10 is not a sacred number either, but it's a number that sounds good. Ideally, this number should be something like, as Will was saying, like what you would do naturally is the cheapest thing, which is do CC. If you want to do something like verified data storage, that will introduce more complexity and more costs to you. So the ideal multiplier should be the one that compensates this extra work. And if that is that 10, so probably 10 is bigger than that because people are doing this, right? So it at least compensate that. Maybe overcompensates. We don't know, but that's kind of the principal way of it should be set to accommodate that difference in cost. But then there's more parameters like how much data cap is there, and that's kind of where it gets more murky for me. That this is sort of outside of Filecoin's direct governance at the moment, right? So there's this whole network. Okay, so there's Field Plus governance, and you have your root key holders, and they say like they give this amount of data cap to allocators to allocate to their notaries or to whoever, and there's this whole chain. But there's the ultimate question of how much data cap is there, and this how much data cap is there and how much multiplier is it worth determines how much of a subsidy we are giving to the Field Plus program, right? So we can try to translate this in terms of, I think this is where Will was going with kind of the tax, that we can try to translate this like how much money are we actually spending, because this definition kind of obscures how much money we're spending on Field Plus, right? But say if we give enough data cap to fill the entire Falcon capacity with Field Plus, then we would be giving sort of like 90% of block rewards worth of money to this program, right? Because, anyway, so we're giving some of it. Given this multiplier, we're choosing this amount of data will receive data cap, and at 10x worth, this is how much funding we're giving to this program. It's something to be aware of. So the point is, this program is supposed to be satisfying this goal, which is to help achieve this mission that we agree is important. And if we don't agree, that's another conversation. We don't agree it should do, but anyways, given that this is the mission, this program is trying to achieve this with this specific formalism at this specific cost. Maybe there's plenty of room to agree on the mission, but think that parameters or ways of doing it should change. Maybe a multiplier is not the correct way. Maybe like reserving an explicit piece of the block reward, or like I don't know. So these are like, it's worth defining Field Plus or something like Field Plus as a concept, and then current version of Field Plus with this number of parameters and what they do. And you can agree with one, want to make many changes on the other. I think these things are compatible.
Yeah, I think I agree with that in general, and I think that was like just JV, when you were earlier talking about like, is this, you know, as effective when everyone has it? Like if all of the network is Fill Plus, is it still an effective thing? I think that is an interesting question about the specific mechanism, which is different from sort of this broader like, do we want this incentive layer? And I think, you know, that there also is this question about like, how do you wield and effectively, you know, somehow in the governance, and or like what is the most effective way to use the mechanisms we have, and should this be sort of a scarce thing, or should we be thinking about how much data cap is out there versus onboarding rates and stuff like that, is sort of part of this like mechanistic, like employing and evolving the mechanism to be as effective as it can be. But I think, you know, stepping back one layer to the general sense, I think there are maybe a couple things to be thinking about, which is like, I think the question of like, are block rewards needed in the current economy network to make paid deals profitable is an interesting one, right? Which is the, you know, this, we sort of were saying, well, we've got sort of like a current pragmatic outlook we need to take. at the current prices of stuff and the current block reward levels. And looking at how those block rewards are today for an inbound deal versus for both a participant who's a rational actor, who is playing the game of saying, okay, I'll find one of these public open data sets or whatever's the cheapest way to meet the criteria I can understand around the fill plus mechanism that exists today. But I do want that 10x because I'm making a bunch of money off of block rewards from that. Is that the business we're actually should be encouraging with fill plus? And how does that interact with these businesses that we see as being the long-term successful outcome, like a paid deal with or without fill plus? And so if you've got clients paying you, there's a couple of questions, which is, how much are you relying and or feeling like you're like being left out of the block rewards and of the network incentivization because of fill plus? And there's a mechanistic question of like, shouldn't almost everyone who's getting paid deals, that seems justifiable somehow as making the network better. And so shouldn't you also be getting these rewards? And so that seems like a mechanism being used incorrectly if that's not happening. I did have one reaction to sort of the proposal for like, should there be some sort of way to stake or choose which entity gets your tax, which has been done in a few ways. I think there's a couple things. One is like, do we feel like we've got a governance system that is sufficiently effective to nominate and get to delegates? I think the worry is if you just do a simple staking thing, the outcome I would see is that everyone would just stake with themselves as a way of opting out of paying taxes. And that seems like you've essentially just sort of said, if taxes are opt-in, I think you end up in a tragedy of commons. And so what is the governance structure that, gets to a pool of delegates that you can choose to which of them to delegate with, or some other setup in which you still are able to have effective things come out of this? If you're going to restructure it like that, what is the positive outcome that you end up imagining, right? Like I think competition where it's not a you choose Fiddle versus someone else so that you get the best program administrator, that makes a lot of sense to me. You choose Fiddle or you choose yourself and you just choose to opt out of taxes seems more worrying to me. So figuring out what that structure is seems more complex somehow.
For what it's worth, I think there's like simplish answers, but I also don't want to pretend I've given this like tons of thought, but like off the cuff, like we already sort of have this, right? Like people choose to stake with a bunch of these liquid staking things. I think it's like totally reasonable to say like, okay, the delegation now is on Parasail, Glyph, any of these teams, to say like, who are either you redelegating this to? It's like, it is potentially up to those protocols and those teams to then figure out and like market as like, how are they doing this? And I do imagine the thing that will happen is it becomes much more of like a show me, where it's like, if Glyph is trying to win the next batch of token holders to come deposit with them, part of their marketing thing is like, we're able to get the highest yields because we work with all of these SPs that are actually doing useful things for the network. Here's all these paid deals that are showing up on chain. So it's like visible that this is happening, auditable. It like sets a different point where it's like, use the chain as like the reference, which I think is like anyways a thing that we probably want. And I think like that doesn't mean like Glyph has to go out and be doing this themselves. They may say like, hey, we're partnering with Fiddle and whoever else to like solve for that problem. But I think there's ways of basically like turning this into the same way people talk about like the social layer of like ETH. Like you could just have it be more like, show me the dashboard, which is pulling on-chain information that shows that you're getting like paid revenue for me to like trust that you're not BSing me. And then people will, and like part of that is then just educating people about it. But I think there's like actually a positive externality that it forces more of this to be like, hey, look, if you're an SP who wants to get like loads of fill, there isn't like a backroom deal you can make. Like these people are going to have to market to the broader world that like, hey, there's real paid revenue that's coming in. Show us this paid revenue on chain in a way that anyone else could build a dashboard and observe. Now that doesn't come with some trade-offs. Like it does lose the ability for people to say like, I mean, and I know this is how people use some of the Fill Plus stuff today to say like, hey, look, these are where we have like a choke point of where our customer is being listed, so you can like more concretely make these arguments. But I don't think those are like necessarily blocking. It's more like we just have to think about what is the version of the system? How do you want to like sort of like, yeah, do the promotion and stuff like that? And I feel like it's actually interesting if you look at Solana as well. They have this protocol called Sanctum, which is basically like a bunch of different LSTs, and each LST has like a slightly different marketing pitch about like what is the thing that you're doing. Because of how Solana works, the LSTs are sometimes based on like individual programs. So it's like Jupiter will have Sol, so it can like secure the basic like uptime of that application. So I think like there's things we could draw inspiration from and like, yeah, try to model it. But I also don't want to like over anchor on what was an off the cuff suggestion. It's more like there might be a wider design space than what we're currently considering.
Yeah, let me jump in. There are a few let's say objectionable directions in what was said so far. I'm going to anchor on the SP operation side right now. We keep talking about paid deals as being the metric where most folks understand their paid deals, paid storage deals, which cannot happen in an offering like Filecoin, which is exclusively, without exception, only for archival data. This is the only thing that the network can actually prove. And everything associated with this, which is retrieval, which is unscrambling the data or storing a clear copy, is way more expensive in orders of magnitude than the actual storage of the cold data, which is the SDR scramble thing that actually provides consensus. We did have an option about a year ago to maybe do also access to clear data to the unscrambled portion. This got deprioritized as being like too hairy for whatever reason. But the main point that I want to like push back on is that doing paid deals the way it was understood and said on the call so far is not something that any client wants. Paid deals, the way Filecoin does them, is the thing that you get from Glacier. You can check the price right now; they don't cost anything. What costs is the retrieval, the micropayments on retrieval, and so on and so forth, where Jeff Bezos is, taking an arm and a leg of every first and second born. And I think Rob already connected and is like stable now, hopefully. Maybe he can add some more to that. But like my general point is that we are talking about a solution space to a problem that there is no agreement on. Like, yes, storing the humanities data is a sexy slogan. Everybody agrees on it because it sounds good, but it actually doesn't mean anything, right? Who is the humanity? What kind of data? We had a number of work sessions in Brussels about a month ago to try to define like what is data that Filecoin in the face of the people controlling it today wants to see. We couldn't even arrive at that kind of of meta definition in a pretty close circle. So anyway, I said a lot of things. Let's start pulling on this, but I want Rab to potentially jump in the conversation if possible. Maybe not.
Not yet
No?
possible.
Okay, not yet possible.
Well,
Who's next?
well, maybe, yeah, well, Reba, maybe to quickly respond, I was going to type a note in case Rob was hopping on. Like, so again, I'm not anchoring as like this is a real, I'm not saying it's not a real solution. I'm also not saying like I've given it a ton of thought. I don't actually think the thing I'm suggesting is like, hey, you have to have everything fully verifiable in the same way. I'm actually saying like proof of stake as a concept would be the thing securing it. Like, yes, you may have people who do Hindenburg research style, like short selling reports on like this delegee or delegate or whoever is actually bullshitting everybody. And here's why, like, you shouldn't stake with them. So I think it is actually like a fundamental change if we were to go down that route. But yeah, so I think like a lot of this actually comes down to what you sort of were alluding to, which is also like what are core properties we want out of the network? And given like where the research is, where the technology is, what are the things that are like real statements that we can make? And then I think some of that may be like a social decision of like, how are we prioritizing A versus B? But I think also just getting like clear about it. Like if we make some set of policy choices, what are the downstream implications? And like, how do we have a theory of success that then people can sort of like fully follow the full trail on? Because I think it's like, yeah, if we know that the cold storage proofs will only be good for cold storage proofs, like how do we sort of like expand that theory of value to say like, all right, so then this is what a vision of the Filecoin ecosystem looks like if we follow this thread all the way through, versus if we make ABC modification, what would this potentially imply? And like, there are real trade-offs. So if you move away from proof of work key things, we lose more hardware probably. Like that has real consequences if part of your theory of value is like, well, Filecoin's going to have all these GPUs and you're going to do compute and all this other stuff. So like, I'm not trying to bias in one way or another. I think it's more like we should be explicit. What is the set of policy trade-offs? What is the vision that we have then under each regime of like, how does that translate to like long-term value for the network?
Yeah, I just want to correct one thing. What I meant to say, and what I meant, is that the cold storage proofs connected to consensus are only good for cold storage proofs. So until you connect something to how block rewards are distributed, it becomes just a smart contract that some people participate in and some don't. And it is not a base proposition of the network anymore, right? So I want to differentiate between things that actually distribute block rewards and things that are just kind of on the side and have their own almost L2 kind of life, which probably a little bit out of scope.
Okay, I find this to be an interesting thing because there's this like code is law like part of the stuff we can fully automate and depermission that is one concrete view of we have a network that is rewarding proofs of cold storage replication of hard drives being on. And we have imposed a messier modification of our block rewards that is meant to be helping us align that over towards a longer term alignment towards storing useful data. And we haven't figured out how to fully automatically identify and make our block reward power directly reflect that. But we have this other governance structure, much like a DAO might, in which we can try to align that reward to make that be the thing that gets rewarded by the network. So we have both some direct quantitative objective views of a side effect or a symptom that is visible of you are storing data. That is something that you have demonstrated through your POREPs. But then we also have these other things like, oh, here's this record that is archived from GitHub of the KYC of the client and so forth that indicates that what's being stored is not simply some random bytes, but something that is linked to some off-chain data about there being a customer relationship and so forth. And that gives us more confidence that this is in line with this broader thing. And so I don't necessarily see that as meaning that that is in L2. I see that as and the Phil plus structure mechanism that exists and the broader incentivization tax of block rewards as trying to maintain a network that captures this broader value despite the implemented part of POREPs only being able to capture a limited set of symptoms into that.
The POREPs themselves do not make any distinction. The reason the POREPs are effective only for cold storage is because they tying them to consensus requires the data to be unique in order to be able to count actual hardware as opposed to somebody sharing between themselves or compressing it or whatever it is. And as a result of that, we get the cold storage side effect. Nobody set out originally to say like, yeah, Filecoin is going to be used for cold storage. It's the fact that without the encoding on disk, which makes it cold storage, there is no viable way to make this a non-trivially gameable part of the reward distribution, right? So there is a little cause and effect there. If we were a completely proof-of-stake network, then none of this would be a problem. The question, though, is like, if we are a completely proof-of-stake network, why run a network in the first place? Like, put everything on Ethereum, call it a day. That's that, right? Make Filecoin a rep token, and moreover, this is not like this is not theoretical. A number of networks from like the 2017 2018 era turned themselves into an ERC20 when things became more stable and more available. So this is definitely a path, right? It's yeah.
Let me also propose that there's like other paths too, where it's like we could, and again, this really comes down to like, so what are we doing here? Because like another version of the world is like the L1 is about hardware acquisition, and part of the reason why we as a network want to be an L1 is that L1s carry a premium to them. We think we can build like a full economy around it, but that may also mean that like maybe we need an answer to like how to enshrine this idea that L2s are for utility or something. And like that should be a meme that we're pushing. And like maybe part of what we need to do then is have like a notion of, hey, how do we align the L2s so they're not parasitic to the Filecoin ecosystem? If we're going to solve the supply side and get them all the hardware, then maybe there's like some portion of block rewards should go towards people who stake to secure L2s. And so then there's an incentive for L2s to come. Like they're getting cheap hardware. That hardware is like coming at a discount to them if the Filecoin like token holders are staking to secure that network for them. And then there's like some version of that which becomes more like pro-growthy, where it's like, yes, you as Basin or you as Diracha, like the reason that you're setting up shop in the Filecoin ecosystem is like they're the other half of what you need. And like that does change sort of like how do we think about even go to market and building solutions, but I think also like a viable path. A lot of this I think is just like how do we get some sort of alignment as like an ecosystem of, okay, yeah, given what the technology actually can do, what is like the most valuable set of choices that we can make to like grow ourselves.
Rob, we can see you now. Can we hear you?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Woo!
Nice. All right, yeah. Massive issues with NVIDIA drivers.
Oh no, the curse of drivers. I feel your pain. Or at least the gaming part of my head feels your pain. So Rob, you're you've been in an SP since very early days of Filecoin. I think we brought you on just to sort of get your take on this, so we didn't like ascend into theoretical heaven too quickly. So what's your experience been of Filecoin Plus, and how does that fit in with sort of how you operate as an SP?
Right. In the beginning, when we started the network and everyone was just, onboarding CC stuff, and there was no real value in data being added on the network, it was a nice idea, in my opinion, to, onboard some data and get some public data sets on there and make people focus on actually making it useful. And then it got gamed and it got worse and worse, and we should have stopped it like a long time ago. That is pretty much my opinion on it as it stands today. So it was a good idea initially, to get the ball rolling, but we should have stopped it like way earlier.
So in your business, are you taking paid deals? How is your sort of business divided between CC sectors and
Yeah, we have some clients who are still taking them slowly, like, focus has shifted away from Filecoin, and in the background we have Spade running. We have the sword sitting there, and it's doing its thing. It's doing some serving some retrievals. Some other clients have very clearly opted out and just terminated all their sectors. They have a very clear stance on the Filecoin Plus project. I don't know. It's kind of like bleeding out, or so it feels at least, which is a shame, because I still think there's a lot of potency in, you know, the technique and the technology behind what is Filecoin. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I guess I'm here to share on that side.
So have you sort of been taking, do you get your primary income on the Filecoin side from sort of people wanting to store stuff, or primarily the block rewards at the moment?
Block rewards. It has been block rewards, right? The first few customers that got in got massive amounts of Filecoin from the block rewards. They stepped in on the right time. Still are, you know, given the stuff that they're storing there. We've tried some stuff, you know, just for the retrievals and trying to get paid through that with the grafting back in the day, which is no longer working. And then we heard about Saturn, which I thought was, okay, this is going to solve our retrieval payment options problems. But turned out that also was being gamed, and it was not actually related to Filecoin as it is. So I don't know. You know, it was just things like that that kept on happening, and well, I kind of let it go. But yeah, most of the income did.
So the thought, just to clarify that point, sorry to jump in, but the thought is that if you're not thinking about block rewards as sort of the main revenue source, it's going to be the retrieval side rather than that individual storage and the hard drive cost. And so without sort of active retrieval, something closer to a hot storage layer, it's not something that's going to be economically worth thinking about.
Yeah, so like there's the only option right now really is block rewards, because selling storage to people is not really possible, because everyone's, you know, the whole Phil Plus stuff is being gamed. Nobody's going to want to pay, and the people that want to pay also want to have things like ACL in there, which we can't really offer on the Filecoin network as it is. And then you'd say, you know, let's get some.
And that's because of a lack of tooling.
Yeah, the ACL stuff. That wouldn't be like a layer one issue. I mean, even it's just dinosaurs that don't want stuff to be publicly retrievable, even if it's sharded and encrypted, and you know, theoretically couldn't even get their data. They have like contracts and you know, dinosaur type deals. You have to have some kind of ACL. That was a challenge. So we would have to set up separate miners to provide that, and it would get too expensive, and you know, a lot of maintenance to keep doing that. And so like paid deals didn't really bring any money in, and then you have the retrieval side of things, also impossible. Like the only real way to make money at this point would have been, you know, pay for block for File Plus deals, so you get a jump start on everyone else, and you get more block rewards than the rest. And while that's happening, the network itself is dying. So I don't know. We kind of, you know, gave up a bit. Still hoping, but
JV, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. I guess so. One, I'd just be curious, like, let's say, I think I know what for the SPs or the people that left Filecoin due to Filecoin Plus. I think I have a feeling I know why. I'd be curious if you could like maybe explicitly just state what your opinion is there. And then two, I guess like if we had capped or limited Phil Plus as you had suggested, do you think that would have made, like in the counterfactual, like do we think that that would have made a big difference, or would we just have ended up at the same place because people are still not making money? It was a bear market, price of Phil, maintaining more hardware, like we'd still sort of like push ourselves down. And then I guess like maybe three is like, do we actually 3 and 4? 3 would be, do you think if we were to come up with a new solution that addresses whatever your answer is to 1, those SPs are like gone for good, or are they more like until X is fixed, like we're not coming back? And then I guess 4 is like for paid deals, if you could maybe just summarize, like, are you hoping mostly for like other like on-ramps or someone to build the requisite tooling, or like what do you see as like the current gaps, and like do you have a vision of like what is the path to get there? Sorry, that was kind of a lot, but yeah.
Yeah. Let me just jump in to set the stage for the folks who don't know. Rab's history is not only as a individual SP with with his partners, they also operated a number of SPs for other entities. So they were both an SP operator and an SP operator as a service. So Rab, I don't know how many details you can go there, but basically there are 2 different viewpoints that he can share. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. So yeah, the one end is, like you said, we have our own miners, which are fairly small, and we manage a few for a few different clients, separate entities. So the first question I think was, do you think it would have helped if we build out like Phil Plus earlier? But honestly, I couldn't tell. I mean, it's easy to say afterwards, like, yeah, we should have done that, or we should have done that. My gut feeling says it might have helped, but I can't be 100% sure on that. What is like the big difference for me? Like when I joined the network and thought like what it would have been, I would see some kind of like a big peer-to-peer network where a bunch of microtransactions are going each way, and people are paying each other for, storing, proxying data, which I know is not a viable thing to do on the L1 as it is here right now. And there's some projects trying to fix that, such as Saturn. But I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answers for it. I think having some kind of ACL and having some kind of way to get paid for giving people out their data and serving the retrievals would help, would incentivize a lot more people to join it, other than the Fel Plus stuff that's being done now. I don't know. Yeah, my answers are all over the place as well. But
Yeah, well, actually, those are great. I think the one question that maybe you didn't answer directly, or maybe I wasn't super clear, I guess like for the SPs that you've seen leaving, if you could sort of like summarize, what do you think they're, like you said, a lot of them left because of Phil Plus. Like what were, if you could summarize, so I'm not just like inferring, like what do you see as like the actual issues there? And related to that was, if we address those issues, do you think those SPs would come back, or where do you think the sentiment is right now?
they might come back, but it would basically mean, get rid of Phil Plus. Period. I can't go into too many details.
And those SPs were focused on block rewards.
Yeah, they were. And they decided the Filecoin Plus wasn't what it's supposed to be. Like it was being gamed as well, and it's not a decentralized solution. Having some kind of centralized entity deciding what is important information and who gets paid for it, and then you have websites spinning up tooling for people to buy Filecoin Plus deals. Like, it makes no sense. If that's happening, something's wrong, 100%. So, I mean, I can't say I haven't gamed it as well. Obviously, I joined in. I also did the Filecoin Plus deals. Also tried to get as many as I could while adhering to the rules set. But it's still, that's not right. It's not supposed to be there in a decentralized storage space. Makes no sense.
Could I just double click? Is the is the issue the idea of having like unequal rewards for different types of work, or the fact that it's like there's like a social layer to it? And do you see what I'm saying? There's like two slightly different issues that could be sort of the root cause of that. Is it the fact that it's like not quote unquote permissionless, or is it the fact that there's like different rewards for, let's assume there was like a permissionless version, would they be like also opposed to that too?
I think that's what people have been trying to do for like the past 2.5 years, right? And to get the decentralized version of Filecoin Plus in, but I don't think it's gonna work really. So it's gonna be something or someone that's gonna decide if something is worth the Filecoin Plus or not, and then that's gonna be exploited. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I feel like my take here is that I don't know. I don't know if this is like too cynical or whatever, but I feel like I might as well say this, which is like there's a set of participants who feel like they're going to lose at the game, and it is not profitable for them if they can't play the game, and they don't want to play the game, and so it's not going to be profitable for them, and so they're going to stop playing. And so then the question is, how valuable does the network think that is, and does that either mean we've structured the network to have the wrong game, or are we okay with that outcome where we have designed a game where this is not profitable for you to just provide committed capacity, for instance, and that's because the Phil Plus, when it had that graph, was it wants a network where it's setting the incentive so that it is 90% used storage and 10% committed capacity, and right now, based on those ratios, it is not incentivizing more committed capacity. And if you come in saying I am, willing to invest hardware to do committed capacity, and that's not what the network is incentivizing, and so it's not going to be economically profitable for me to do that. That is what the current incentive is as a mechanism is doing, right? Like there is a view of that is working as intended, and that yes, the raw byte power will be going down until the active amount of storage is 90% of the network. Is what the structure is, I think, in some view, saying it is incentivizing.
I think that's right, but I think there's still a version. Go for it. Yeah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I want to add maybe a friendlier sounding version of that, but similar. So I think like the hugest driver of why many SPs have left the network is that fuel price has gone down, and this is also a company that fuel block rewards are decay over time, right? So there's less reward going out, and if we are still haven't reached the stage where people can support themselves through paid deals, then we are giving out less in rewards. Naturally, this and these rewards are worth less than they were before. This is gonna support a much smaller network. So I wonder if the claim is that more SPs left than they should have, and if there's like any evidence for this, because the price has gone way down and rewards are going down. I guess I would expect this network will largely a lot of SPs will leave, because and if price were to go up at some point, then I expect if not those SPs that left come back, then others will come because price go up and now there's more rewards. Right? So size of the network, I completely expect to follow like token price and total rewards given out. And so that explains a large part of why SPs left, because there's fewer rewards now and more people fighting over them. So it's going to support a smaller network. Some have to live with. So I wonder if there's a claim that more SPs and more quality SPs left than should have, because already I expect a big number to leave because of economic conditions. And I expect if economic conditions become better and price goes up and things are good, I expect set of SPs to grow. So I wonder if there's a claim that goes beyond that then we can explain, yes, because of the Fuel Plus program, this happened. And by the way, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. I'm not denying that many had bad experiences and left that are unhappy with per situation. But yeah, I'm wondering what cannot be explained because of this.
I just want to hop in quickly to sort of, because I think, Axel, you made part of the point I was going to, and then Rob, I think you wanted to respond. Yeah, like I wonder specifically, like, if so this is kind of why I was asking the question of like, why did people leave? Did people leave because it's like a philosophical disagreement? Because I don't think that's like, hey, miners are getting washed out because of like token price or anything else. It's more like, hey, miners are just fed up with the fact that there's like a missing side of the permissionlessness. That isn't actually saying that there is a solution that exists that is fully permissionless. I think there's like, that's like its own separate discussion if you could design a system that's perfect. But I think that's where it's like kind of important for us to know the difference, because then it's possible that like, are we accelerating ourselves into whatever the bottoming is? And I don't know if that's actually necessarily good, because it doesn't mean that like, oh, once we hit whatever bottom, we're magically going to pull ourselves out. Because I think there's like, if it's for philosophical reasons, not for economic reasons, then we're in kind of like a different ballpark. But yeah, Rob, if you want to answer.
Yeah. So I don't think the whole crypto space, everything went down, obviously. Filecoin went down harder, but I don't think per se that is the reason people left. I think it might have been the other way around greatly. Like the price dropped because people left, because things like Filecoin Plus are being gamed, because things like that storage stuff, Saturn, was being gamed. I mean, even the space race stuff was being gamed, and there have always been like people on top that were making decisions that, in my opinion, were not good decisions, and a lot of like SPs were fed up with that kind of stuff. I mean, there's still a lot of people that do trust in it, believe in it, but there's also a lot of people that are just gaming it right now. I think that's one of the big reasons a bunch of honest SPs left. And yeah, I mean, there's also economic factors, the coin itself going down, but I don't think it's that big of an impact as opposed to the other stuff that's going on with Filecoin.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, like to put Rap's words and to add some colors to them. Will, when you say the SPs who are playing the game correctly are the ones that are remaining while the others left, the reality is that those SPs are not actually playing your game. They're just playing Spark and the retrieval testing and stuff like that better than, for example, Rab or anyone who left has the time and capacity to. Like, I will say on the record, I have advised teams how to game the Spark system, because this is a stupid system in my opinion, right? So if we have a thing that is that measures a particular thing, that like we have a network in the face of the Spark network, which measures a particular outcome which fits a nice graph, then the outcome is that people are optimizing to get this graph up and to the right. And we don't have the mechanisms by which to connect it back to what an actual honest storage provider would do. And that is, I think, the main problem of like synthetic measurements versus actual usage that we're facing.
So one of the things I'm reminded about, and something that Rob, you said earlier, was talking about tooling, right? ACLs and things like this. And what it reminded me of is Block Science's analysis of the CDM, and I can't remember the FIP number, FIP 56, right? So they did the usual kind of crypto analysis and stuff, and mostly it was kind of like, okay, here's how we think of it. But like there was a key bit in there which sort of went, well, part of the question, the open questions here is sort of the maturity of the tooling, right? Which is to say, if the tooling isn't there, if it's not easy to provide like the microtransactions that you describe, right? If it's not easy or possible to charge for retrievability or do that, right? Then you don't really have much option except to try and game it, right, in a sensible way. Well, let me put that a bit in a bit more free will kind of way, right? Like it becomes cheaper to try and game whatever figure is there than it does to actually do the thing, right? And in any system where you've got like, you're trying to steer people towards a particular thing, if, it's easier to cheat on your taxes, right, than it is to just pay your taxes, then people are going to cheat. And I do wonder, like, I think that there's two things going on here, right? Which you've sort of talked about. One is kind of like, can I actually make a living doing this? But also, and I think this is the social element that a lot of the numbers don't carry, is if you think that the game is rigged, right? If you think that the only thing you can do is do a thing that you weren't really, philosophically, as JV says, in this game to play, right? Then you're going to withdraw, right? So, one of the things when I have conversations with SPs, and it comes back to it, is this idea of like, if people are cheating on Phil Plus or something like that, what's the point in even playing, right? What's the, like, I don't want to be that person breaking these rules. Other people are breaking these rules. I'm losing something as a consequence of them successfully breaking those rules. So, this is a rigged game, right? It's not, and that's the way that people think of as permissionless, right? Is there is not someone running the whole thing who is running it in a way that I can't actually do an honest day's business. And I think that that is a completely valid way to think of things, particularly when you see this happening. And like you say, you see websites and such sort of selling selling data cap. I think another part of it, though, is like, how do you steer people away from that cheating to doing what the system is designed to do? And it's two things. One is that it may be just that you can't do that within this existing system, right? The second one is like, maybe it's something like the tooling, maybe it's something else that's broken, that the more you can fix that and build that, then people would naturally slide towards it. The third one, which I say just because people say this, I don't think this is the current status of the system, is that you're always going to have some cheats in any system, right? And like, I think the challenge with that is, one, it's very hard to measure the cheating, obviously, because if you could measure it, you would stop it or you would like try and fix it. Two, I think it still has that social problem, right? If there's even a little bit of cheating, people get pissed off with the system as a whole. And I think the third one, I always say three things and then forget the last one just before I say it. But I think the third one is that we don't have an enforcement. Like, we can't punish people, right? People really want the system to punish cheaters, but I I don't know a way of like actively punishing people in a voluntary system like this, short of I don't know, right? Like it's something that people want to punish the cheaters, but I don't think, unless other people have better ideas, I don't think there's a way you can do that, at least in a way that satisfies people's kind of, I mean, if only for civil problems, right? Because you punish them and then they come back.
So my idea would be, if you are going to punish people for cheating, then you shouldn't be allowing them to be able to cheat in the first place.
Right.
So you shouldn't allow that system anyway, right? If it's cheatable, especially in like the crypto world, if it's cheatable, it's going to be cheated 100%. So like that's like my opinion on why it shouldn't have been there in the first place, or at least not as long as it's going on right now. But
yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
there's
Danny,
definitely
maybe
oh, sorry, JB, go ahead.
I was just gonna say to plus one that because I put something similar in the chat. I do think it's worth noting that when things are subjective, what one defines as cheating largely ends up falling in this gray area. I mean, there's things that might vary far past whatever boundary line. There's also like this messy gray area of like, is it cheating or is it not cheating? And a lot of that comes down to like subjective interpretation, which is actually, I think, a really strong argument for like why it's better to have something that is more objective, because like the thing that we don't want is to mire ourselves in like loads of debate, and especially since we know like the economic gravity is like finding the path of least resistance to get the economic reward. Like uh having something that is subjective, I think, puts you in this like weird position. And I mean, like to counter this, or I guess like to counter or like support my argument, like how would one cheat at Bitcoin mining? Like what is the mechanism that one would do to cheat? Because there is a large bounty to try. And if you know, please let me know. Like,
I mean, the
So I
reason
think there's a couple things
really small
like
point, which is
okay.
just like the reason people cheat in a blockchain, in a crypto environment, is because everything apart from the stuff that you can't cheat in is, I think, perceived as sort of fair game, because those are the constraints of the system that you're working within it. Sorry, but go ahead.
So okay, so a lot of this conversation is turned to the current mechanism that's at play. So there's a structure that exists today where I think, Rob, I agree with you that the um, choice was made a couple of years ago around this public open data sets as a thing that could be used as a um, proxy or as a stand-in for real clients, as a way to help incentivize something that was seen as well. Having these data sets on the network is good for a set of reasons that I think we can agree with around, like, oh, there's data that you can start to do your compute over data on, and so that can have potential nice tie-ins. We can talk about all of these data sets that exist on the network, and that has some nice PR values. And we have a lot of SPs that aren't prepared to go out and directly do BD and find paying clients. And so how do we provide some sort of smoother ramp where they are still able to run businesses, because they're still doing valuable things. They're still willing to do valuable things. So what are valuable things we can incentivize there? And I think one of the things that happened, looking at the state of where the current Fill Plus mechanism is that there wasn't good enforcement, or certainly good enough enforcement, around making the cost of those public open data sets to SPs remain higher than paid client deals, which I think should have been how that was structured. I think there were a set of things there that could have been done to do that in that mechanistic thing. But what we ended up with is that onboarding these open data sets without a client is today, and has been, much cheaper than doing the BD. And so we ended up disincentivizing getting clients and participating in that way. And instead, the rational behavior was to just onboard the 50th copy of AWS Common Crawl. And that speaks as much to a lax enforcement of how that structure happened as anything else. And so now you've got a couple of questions, which is like, what do you do when you're in the situation? And it's like, do you just sort of say, actually, we want to change to not allow public open data sets anymore. We've decided that this has outlived its value, and so we're just going to cut off this whole thing. I think finding yourself in a position with relatively low community trust of, is this program or anything that it does going to be effective, along with a set of pretty shaky just general trust even broader, where making sort of large sweeping changes of that nature, while technically within the governance and scope of Phil Plus, would be a major shock that would cause likely, and like this is my gut instinct, significantly more people to just be like, whoa, I can't do any of this. I've got my thing for how I'm doing it. I'm pausing and or like doing that. Leads to a really limited set of options within the evolutionary process of how do you evolutionarily like proceed, where what you can do is start to implement things to make the cost of these open data sets higher and higher to get to a point where it becomes more rational to go find paying clients and go that route. And I guess the two parts of that you can do is you can try and say, are there ways to make there be less friction for when you are getting paid clients and bring that cost down? Can we do, can we support some BD and matchmaking so that the acquisition cost of clients is lower? Can we make the Phil Plus process in those cases really smooth? And then for the cases where it is in the sector of public, open, whatever, can we make that more constrained? And how much can we make that constrained over time to not have that be a sudden shock? And so I think, in terms of what I've been advocating in my day job, it's like you need to actually technically demonstrate the full data prep. Like we need to see what that transformation is. It needs to be reproducible. Some other client needs to be able to know how they actually get and use that. I think, Spark is very much not perfect, but is a step that gives us a whole bunch of insight already and can over time become more and more expensive. Right. And the point of that retrieval stuff is that it's another cost. It now means that you need to know where those unsealed copies are. That now suddenly we've got latency things that we can do against those endpoints that have to be visible, that let us understand where those things are getting served from. And it's a start. So I don't think it's this is the solution. But I think these are stepping stones that raise the cost of that versus going out and having paid deals, or at least that's the intention. And so I think the two questions are, if you were to think about a structural change, how does that structural change not have these same problems? I think you do get a little bit more trust if you go through a governance trust building community buy-in process. So it gives us the ability to get, if we're lucky, to a mandate to have a larger transition. But you're still going to have a slow transition. Because even if you say, great, we're going to get rid of block rewards or a block reward multiplier, you're not going to do that on the current deals. Because you don't we're worried about changing the economics for people who've already committed to various types of economics. And so as you get too radical, being like, we're getting rid of the 10x multiplier on all existing deals, that's going to be seen as very radical as in terms of changing what people have been able to forecast and predict. And so I have to imagine that even beyond that, as you get to the okay, we want to change to some other incentive, you're going to do something like, we're going to transition out of this over the next year or the next deal term to, by the end of the next deal term, everything goes to 10x, or vice versa, everything goes back to 1x. Things of that nature to allow for a smoother economic transition and allow for people to plan for these things. So I think, I'm interested in whether we see there being a thing that happens in the transition of this in faster than a year or a couple of years. That just seems like the timeline for any sort of major transition here, to phase out these current economic structures. And so if you're then limited there, is this the right place to be pushing? Versus if we can build retrieval tooling for paid retrieval in a month or a couple months, that seems like a faster way to introduce potentially changed incentives and structures. So that's I guess one thing is like, is this the right focus? Yeah, and ACLs. And what's the minimum there to actually be enough? And I think there's people working on this. But maybe the other one is, should the incentives, which right now is this like manipulation that goes to SPs, somehow go into working on those problems? Because and so like maybe that's like, we take the things that Fiddle is doing and we just focus on getting ACLs and retrievals into Curio and Boost, and sort of throw up our hands and say, great, what we're going to do is provide sort of enough to not make the boat rock too much worse or sink too much faster on the current thing, allow for a transition, and work on solving these tooling issues. That seems like a reasonable strategy. I think then two things are, what are we transitioning to, which I think is an undefined thing here. Like, what is the incentive thing that we want in a year or 2 years? That's the part that seems a little bit less clear to me. And I think having that, what is a healthy way to still have something? Because if we don't fund this effort to build the retrieval tooling, we've also lost out in some sense. And where is that? And I think that is probably something that's worth talking about in this context, perhaps. I don't know.
A real quick question. At least 3 times you said transition to paid deals. Can we, like, in the next 5 minutes, see if there is any common ground between what you consider a paid deal and what Rob considers as something, number one, that he could sell, and number two, that he could achieve with the tooling and the construct available today or tomorrow, for that matter? Because we keep talking about, like, how do we get there, as if the there is defined, and it's totally unclear to me whether we have that shared agreement.
Sure. There are. Oh yeah, go for it, JB.
I mean, I have maybe the dumbest, but I think when I say paid deals, what do I mean? I actually just mean any revenue source for miners that is them selling a service that shows up on the Filecoin blockchain. That could be POREP, that could be retrievals, though I know retrievals aren't like proved on chain, but if the payment settles there, for me, it's like, what is the net capital flows where there is like economic inflow to miners outside of block rewards for some services via the Filecoin blockchain is like my very general definition. So I'm less specific about, is it monetizing service A, B, and C? It may be true, or it may be the case that like maybe some of those things are not actually monetizable, but like of the universe of things that allow miners to monetize their hardware, like net, we should be maximizing that, is I guess how I'm thinking about it. And I would love to also filter the list of like, let's triangulate what are the actual things that we can sell, like whether that is the POREP stuff, maybe there's a smaller market for that, maybe PDP opens another like aperture, maybe it's like, hey, we need to figure out how to enable Snark marketplaces or stuff like that. Yeah, I think the chat maybe is like,
I would say something that's not too dissimilar, and that is, whether you're just running MinIO to have an S3 type thing, and then separately you keep a POREP'd sealed copy. I feel like that seems to be like, I would see that as meeting this bar where if you've got someone who's willing to pay for an S3 backup or whatever other outside piece of software that gets you data, and then you separately make a second copy, put it onto Filecoin, and POREP it. If you can have some objective way to demonstrate that, and I think that's still where we're iterating on what is the like low friction way to do that. I think that would be sufficient for me to consider that a paid deal. Like there's a customer who is paying for the service, and then if the delta of doing a sealed copy and the POREPs with Phil Plus is economically profitable, you should do that against it. But having that associated with some external broader storage service that is profitable as a paid service independently is, I think, the way I'm conceptualizing a paid deal. Does that make sense, Peter?
It does, but again, like the question goes to Rob.
I think that
let me answer real quick. The question to Rob would be, if you already have a profitable business that's kind of like an S3 on steroids, or on decentralized steroids, whatever, would you even do the sealed copy? Like, would you bother at this point if the business profitable was already, right? So the question isn't what could theoretically be sold, but the question is what can you practically sell? What do you see in the field, so to speak? But Axel had something to say.
I think JV said something very distinct about paid deals being something in particular that you can see on chain, right? So like, let's take just the POREP, like you sold or you sold POREP and receive a payment on chain as part of the deal, and that is strictly a deal that Filecoin can see, right? Because it happened there on chain with the sector, but in reality, there's no SPs and clients don't need to do that. Right? So users can pay for storage anywhere else. They can give cash to the SP if they want, right? We don't necessarily have to see payments happening on chain, which might or might not be a problem. So you might want them to be on chain, but then you would have to think, okay, then we need to incentivize such that happens on chain if you want that to happen. If you don't incentivize that happening, you will not necessarily at all see the payments on chain. So whether are things that you see or not, that might not, I don't know, that depends on, like, you can define paid deals with that or not, but I think what you can see, if they don't happen on chain, what you can detect is kind of like you're seeing people doing POREP and adding sectors, even when it wouldn't seem to you that the math for that would work out, because you would think they are losing money. You would think by what you think storage costs, because we're giving them less rewards than we think they should have. So that probably means they're being compensated some other way. Right? So if you see unreasonable onboarding of sectors, that's probably a paid deal.
I don't know if I agree with that, for two reasons. One is if your outcome then is you mark those as Phil Plus or something, so that suddenly the block rewards do become profitable, then it's just speculative potentially. Or it could be one of these staking / speculative things of, I'm guessing that I will get good block reward type things in the future, and so I'm going to do this even though it's not profitable now. So there's like a couple other reasons that are hard to distinguish from that would make me less confident in that analysis.
Yeah, and it's hard to know like exactly what everyone's costs are. Right? You can have some benchmark. I think I've done some storage. This is what I think the cost, and everyone has different models. This is the cost of storing. People might be more or less efficient in different places, do different things. So the cost might vary. And yeah, and other motivations like this, I have a. So it's not really about the objective reward, but what the people think of that reward, right? I receive 5 Phil now, but I'm very optimistic about that. So I think that's a very high reward. Or I'm very pessimistic and this is a crappy reward, right? So you can't really know. You can get a clue if you make some basic assumption. Like we assume people are neutral about what they think Phil will do. And we have this benchmark of what we think storage costs. And you can try to guess at it, but yeah, there will be unknowns.
I don't think we got, Rob, to the question that Reba asked, which is, what can you sell?
Yeah, so that's from a perspective is in what could I sell my clients? Like what would be profitable to them, what would be interesting to them. Yeah, I think in the most basic and most important thing is they get their money back for the hardware that they invested. And in the beginning, that has been very crooked. It's been a very lucrative investment to do because of the block rewards coming in initially. Then it got even more crooked due to Phil Plus, and we started to think like, okay, if we don't do the Phil Plus, or even if we do it, there could be more money coming in trying to sell storage to people on this entire platform, provable. You get money in from private deals, storing private data for people. A lot of people backed out of that because of simple technological things in there, the ACL or the S3 connectors not being there, retrieval being unreliable. So that's been one thing. And then it just kind of snowballs, you don't have the block rewards coming in, you don't have the ability to sell storage to people. Like everything just kind of crumbles down. So yeah, if it were to be solid and working, and there would be, some kind of extra revenue stream apart from just block rewards, I think that would be an amazing thing for people to sell. Like they don't need to know what they're storing. They're storing it. They're getting paid for it. They're helping storing humanity's most valuable information. And I guess that's what we could sell, but
I think maybe you answer this question like maybe clients, because like you offer the service to other like SPs to administer the SP, and I think this is what you were answering as these are your clients. Like, what can you sell them as storage providers? Maybe I interpret the question more like to users who want to store data. What will you, like people that have data and want to store them, like?
I think it's all very much the same, right? It's all very much the same. If you can sell it to the hardware exploiters, that means you can sell it to clients using the network, which means you can sell it to hardware exploiters. It's like one big circle. It all needs to work together, and then everybody makes a profit. Like the clients pay less for reliable storage. The hardware exploiters get revenue for storing data, and the big monopolies like AWS and Google are slowly being chipped down by a decentralized variant. So it's all very related, I think.
So we're coming up to 10:43. So we've been talking for an hour and 3/4. And as again, we've completely solved the problem. So well done, everyone. I don't know. I guess we should head into the landing thing. I think I guess the question might be like, what have we missed? Like, what should we talk about next time, rather than a summary of what we've talked about here, which I feel like has hit the same sort of areas. Reba, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we should talk about more in the future, or something that you saw here that you want to like pursue?
I mean, for me personally, there is. If I were to start a business today that has something to do with Filecoin, I cannot do it because I have no clarity where the network is headed as the utility function that it is trying to chase, right? Again, storing humanity's important data, great slogan, doesn't tell me anything at all about what the network is trying to do. And having this decentralized network on paper, but in practice, it is, as we can see from any FIP discussion, it is a very, very tightly held development cycle. I would want to get to a point where the holders of the proverbial keys can at least state unambiguously what they see this network being for. Because without that, we are going to keep having this circular conversation in a way where I know Rob wouldn't know, or folks like him wouldn't know what to advise their clients, what to invest in themselves, because we don't even know if Phil Plus will become free for all in 2 months, or it's going to be tightened even more. And that's a massive problem from a planning perspective.
So Rob, you sort of said it in the chat, but like, what are you looking for in the future? What's your sort of ideal set of steps to renew your interest in Filecoin?
Getting rid of the possibility to game it would be a huge one. It feels like you're playing by the rules, you're playing honest, and you're lagging behind. So that's a big like punch in the gut for me to be able to stick my energy into it. So that's one big thing, and the other would be somehow it doesn't really have to be greatly profitable from a revenue perspective, but having some of that basics like working properly, like the retrievals and getting paid for retrievals, it would greatly help be able to sell this stuff. And then the ACL, I know I said it first in the chat, it's not that big of a deal because that's very tailored towards specific customers with specific requirements. But the other 2 points that I've written down there, so good paid retrieval and no more Phil Plus, would be the biggest ones for me personally.
Will, Reba talked about 2 months. Like, so what do you see happening in the next 2 months in Filecoin Plus and the ecosystem? What's your sort of hope in that range of time?
I mean, I think there's different scales here potentially, or different like axes. I think in terms of the current mechanism, 2 months is continuing to raise the cost of open data sets that aren't valuable, or to properly value them. I think there's ongoing work there, is to better try and understand those cost sides and make those appropriately reflective. I think there's been an ongoing conversation about understanding the supply side of data cap, and to better have a sense of like, should data cap be constrained? Should it be matching onboarding rates? And trying to like understand the scope of outstanding data cap, which is one part of the sort of fraud and problem that has been raised, which is, I think, most reflective in that like the more outstanding data cap that there is, the slower any actions that the program takes will be reflected in any changes in incentives. Because if there's a large existing sort of allocated but not used supply of data cap, that means that people can continue doing whatever they're doing, even as the program governance does update. And so trying to figure out how to reduce that outstanding supply while still being able to keep enough like a steadier but less buffered supply means that changes can happen a little bit quicker is one intention. So I think progress will happen there. And then I think the third thing that at least I'm certainly thinking about and hope to have is a clearer proposal, at least from my side, of the where we might head to that could be better. So if we are thinking about, we don't like this mechanism of a 10x block multiplier, then what is a mechanism that would allow for some amount of this overall macroeconomic tax / inflation to be more appropriately used to still have these outcomes of making the network better. that we could potentially be trying to get people to rally around. Like, I think that's the big problem, is like, what is the better option that would still be acceptable to people? Yeah.
So, as a researcher, what kind of data, what kind of information do you sort of crave in this situation? Like, what is the thing that you would most like to, if you had to, could wave a magic wand, what kind of data would you like to get from the network to understand this problem better?
Okay, but I'll also answer the previous question because I liked it better.
Okay, that sounds good.
I mean, something magical to know that will solve many things is like, as we've discussed, it's very hard to quantify this cheating that is happening and this abuse. And like, if we know exactly what happened, when it happens, then we can control it better. I guess, better information on that, and then being able to quickly prevent it once. So in terms of this question, now the previous question of like what I would like to see next. I think it kind of builds on Will's last point, that I'd like to turn to kind of specific proposals, and like there's been a lot of talking, and I think also people on both sides should take more of a harm reduction approach, right? So that like if you're in the position like Fuel Plus should be eliminated, this kind of has had us in deadlock for a while, right? So like, and as Will said, like even if we want to do that, like that's a big complicated stuff. We cannot just eliminate it right away. There's a shock to many people. Do we engineer this over a year or what? So, but especially like I'd be much happier tackling smaller problems and solving them. So for instance, something I'm thinking about right now is like Will has been talking about this problem of public data sets. We have made it such that the incentive is that people do this, and this has become better than actually trying to do a paid deal, right? So in that case, it seems that a proposal there would be like, for this kind of data sets, maybe 10x is too high, right? So 10x is making storing these public data sets a bigger reward than actually going and getting a paid deal, right? So maybe this needs to be toned down for this type of field data, right? This is a specific thing, right? Should we fine tune 10x for different cases? So this is something like specific lines to work about, and these are and yeah. So also about data. So for me, I think that the biggest thing that makes me uncomfortable is the data cap supply obscurity, but because this makes me the most uncomfortable, because this is, so 10x is kind of in Filecoin's governance. Filecoin agree that the multiplier will be 10x, and then we let Q plus governance do the rest. But how much data cap is there? It's it's kind of up to Fuel Plus governance and this mechanism. So yeah, so mechanism. So are we giving out too much Fuel Plus, too little? It's not. I cannot go somewhere to say like, oh, the goal of giving out this amount of data cap was to reach this target, so therefore we are underachieving or overachieving the target, right? Yeah, so the most that we can have more measured control of data cap release, I would be happier, and that this is kind of, like, also if this were controllable by Falcon, right? So who is investing in this? Who is paying for this? Is all field token holders, right? Because when you give data cap, this is kind of a subsidy given by all field holders for this program. That because the reason that it has been decided that this is a public good to try to to get but more in the hands of people to develop. So yeah, it feels kind of outside of the system that the data cap is out of the control of field holders.
JV, what there was a sort of thought there about specific proposals. What are you looking for in the near future? You
I
can
wouldn't say the near
you can
future.
also replace that with a question that you would prefer to answer.
Yeah, well, so I wouldn't say near future. I want to summarize, I think, what my takeaways from this conversation are, because I actually worry a little bit. I think Will and Axel touched on specific things, which I actually think sort of missed a little bit of what Rob was saying, or at least what I heard. So I will replay it. People can contradict me. Like I hear three things that seem like problems we have to solve, and I don't know if we need to solve them on the same timeline. I think the first is sort of this like, what are we doing here? Like, what is a theory of value, and what is like the set of policy proposals, and like how do we reflect that in the design of the network? I think that is going to be a long discussion, and I think it is a discussion that we should have. I think it's just going to take a while for it to play out. But I think this gets to the point that we were discussing earlier about like what's happening on the L1, like what memes do we want to create about the L2? How do we want like the incentive design to like reflect some of that? I think those are like where I think this bucket of like, yeah, we need to come up with a bunch of different ideas. And then I think those are like longer term conversations that the community sort of has to buy into. Maybe a little bit more immediate than that. I think there's the second order thing, or the not second order, but like second point, which is permissionlessness, because I actually took that as being the actual issue here, not 10x. I think people have generally been even like, let's just move to free multipliers. I don't actually know if 10x is the issue. I think it's actually about like who is getting data cap and how are they getting data cap. So even the quantity of data cap, I don't know if it's necessarily the issue, rather that there is some set of rules that people do not feel bought into. And that process being social governance, I think is actually the sticking point that I heard, not so much about like the multiplier. I think that seems like a harder question for us to answer, but if we're going to tackle a thing shorter term, I think it's figuring out how do we get to something that satisfies the concerns there. And then third, which actually I made this number 3, but I think this is probably the most important, is actually like tactically, what is the shortest path for monetizing hardware? And I think Rob did a great job of summarizing, here are the things that are not in the network. And like, I actually don't know who is working on these problems. So I know there's like definitely some people who are thinking about retrievals, but is that like Sriracha? Is that Basin? Is that mostly happening at the L2 level? And I think it also is important even for the foundation and for some of the blue funds that may be listening to this call of like, how are we directing our resources as an ecosystem to like shortening that path? Because the sooner we get cash into the ecosystem, the longer we have to solve the other problems. Because like every miner has more optionality if they're at least break even, just because there is a service they can monetize that pays them. And so I think actually, I don't know what venues we have for this. Maybe this is the DSA. I also am somewhat skeptical because I know like every big call turns into like just a big call and not super productive. But I think we need to figure out how do we get signal from the field back faster so that like we're collectively solving this as an ecosystem of people being like, if I had ABC thing, I could turn on ABC or XYZ revenue streams. And that's, I think, actually the most important thing. So to me, that's actually the much more interesting question. And it probably requires like some small set of SPs who can help gather signal from other SPs and be like representatives to, I don't know, the foundation or whoever else and be like, we desperately need a grant to solve for this problem. And if this problem is solved in this way, we have a dozen other SPs that would be using this as well. And this would net mean like we all can like turn on these revenue streams. And that, I don't know where those discussions are currently happening. I have a hunch they're just happening in pockets and never actually like the capital is not meeting the people who are discussing the lack of tooling piece. But that feels like a critical thing as a takeaway. So yeah, my summary, 1 is like macro network, what are we doing? 2 is like, if we're going to solve things on the current incentive side, I would worry less about 10x and more about permissionlessness and like, how do we make this feel more fair? And then 3 is how do we actually short circuit like the missing tooling piece? And like, how do we even make it transparent to SPs who are wondering if they should continue investing or not? Here are the teams that are working on these initiatives. Here's how you can make sure that it's going to solve the problem for you. Like, be the user feedback that you want to see in the world. Like, I think those are the pieces that could actually solve, I think, just like extending people's runway.
Yeah, I guess I've been moderating this, so I don't get to say what I think, except like except I will because I'm the moderator. But I kind of agree on that like setting up stronger feedback loops and quickly finding like alternative revenue streams. Rob, were you putting your thumb up or just yeah? Okay, cool. I guess as the moderator, it's 11 o'clock. We did it perfectly in 2 hours. Thank you, everybody. And I think there's going to be a transcript up. And thanks as ever for Eva for putting this together. So thanks, everyone. See you around. See you on the internet. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, peeps.